Hello everyone and welcome to ERS Satellites 2023. I'm Richard Costello. I'm a clinician from Dublin and I'm the Chair of Education here at ERS. And joining me today to co-host is Professor Nicolas Roche. Nicolas is a chest physician. He works in Paris. He's a professor of medicine and he's the Chair of Science. Nicolas, nice to see you and thanks for coming along.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Actually, it's a great pleasure. This is our second session of the day, and which will be on COPD. And really, we are lucky to be here. We have this organized by the ERS with 4 national, or some of them are international actually, societies. And we have 4 national society chairs, which I'm going to introduce to you. Starting with Dr. Bernardino Navarrete, who is Associate Professor in Respiratory Medicine, working in the University of Granada in Spain. So Bernardino, nice to see you again here with us.
Hi, Nicola and Richard. Hi to see you again. Thanks for everyone to be involved in this project of the ERS satellites. I have to say that I'm delighted to be here and thankfully for the ERS for inviting me to chair or to chair this session. I'm professor of medicine in the University of Granada and also work as a chest physician in Hospital Virgen de las Nieves. In Granada, I'm very focused in COPD. So I'm just looking forward for these new presentations to bring us more evidence on this disease.
Thanks, Bernardino. And now we have for the French-speaking, French language respiratory society, which we call SPLF, Société de Pneumologie de Langue Française. We have Professor Cindy Barning, who is working in the University Hospital in Besançon, in France. And Cindy also has a role in the National French Language Society as lead of the what we call the G2A, which is the group on asthma and allergy. Cindy, welcome in Geneva, virtually.
Hello again, everyone, and thank you, Nicola, for your kind introduction. I'm really thrilled to be part of this event, and I would like to thank the European Respiratory Society for inviting me as a representative for the French-speaking society. The presentations before the break were incredible, and I'm really looking forward to hearing now from so many experts on COPD. I'm sure that the next talks will be as exciting as the first. Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely they will be. I'm quite confident. Now we have Florin Mihaltan, who is from the National Society of Respiratory Medicine in Romania. And Florin is also the head of the Pulmonary Clinic 3 at the Institute Marius Nasta in Bucharest. He's a member of the Commission for Clinical and Epidemiological Management of COVID-19 with the Ministry of Health of Romania, future president of the Romanian Society of Respiratory Medicine, and last but not least, elected president of the ENSP, which is the European Network for Smoking and Prevention of Tobacco. And Florin, nice to see you again with us.
Hello to everyone. Thank you, Nicolas, for the introduction. Of course, this chapter COPD is a challenging chapter for all. And I'm very glad to see so many experts together. And all my colleagues are impatient, waiting to see what are the new knowledges and the new strategy in this disease.
Thanks, Florin. And last but not least, we have from Greece, Dr. Nicoleta Rovina, who will be the national chair for the Hellenic Thoracic Society. Nicoleta is associate professor in pulmonary and critical care medicine at the National and Capodistrian University of Athens. She's also a research collaborator of cellular immunology in the Center for Basic Science science in the Biomedical Research Foundation of the Academy of Athens, and that is since 2019. Nicoletta, nice to see you again.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be participating in this marvelous event. It's like a science festival, if it is allowed to be expressed like that, but I think this second part will be as fascinating as the first part. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you all. Nice to be with you.
Just to orientate you, the ERS satellites was launched in 2018 with the simple aim to provide cutting-edge education on important clinical topics for healthcare professionals worldwide. So in effect, it's an international clinical meeting delivered with sustainability in mind. And to that end, there are actually 3,000 participants from 130 countries registered and partaking in this meeting as we speak. Over the day, we're covering 4 topics: pulmonary hypertension and pulmonary embolism, COPD, ventilation and asthma. And within each one of these sessions, our speakers have been asked to cover the topic under some themes. One will cover disease mechanisms, another will cover the state-of-the-art treatment approaches, there'll be a clinical perspective, and finally a horizon scanning approach. And that way we really cover the topic from beginning to end. Now, you're very important as participants online. So your interaction is not just needed, it's welcomed, and we hope that you can participate. So please do put your questions to the speakers on the virtual platform. And do interact when there's polling questions. And finally, remember to complete the survey at the end so that you can get your CME credits. Replays of this event will be available on the ERS channel. Now, the ERS channel is something that we at ERS here have been working on developing for some time. I think you're going to really like it. It's got a lot of different media formats with online content covering podcasts, panel discussions, interviews, and even some documentaries. As you've heard, this event is endorsed by several international societies, the Hellenic Thoracic Society, the Romanian Pulmonology Society, SEPAR, and SPLF. And we're also really deeply appreciative of the financial support given as a grant with full discretion by our partners, AstraZeneca, Chiesi, GSK, Pfizer, and Sanofi Regeneron. And we're deeply grateful to them for this sponsorship. And so without further ado, we'll move on to COPD.
ERS is a founding partner of the International Respiratory Coalition, known the IRC. The IRC aims to transform respiratory outcomes in the post-pandemic world by supporting countries to implement national respiratory strategies based on best practice. It aims to reduce deaths from respiratory diseases, including COPD, by a third in 2030. The IRC is developing a range of tools to support countries to form national-level groups, develop plans, and to advocate for much-needed change. Use the IRC's Lung Facts tool to access the latest epidemiological and economic data on COPD per country across WHO Europe. Okay, so now we're going to jump into this COPD session. I'm really excited. As some of you know, it's a topic I really like. So let me first introduce our first speaker, who is Rosa Fenner. Rosa is the group leader at the Department of Biomedical Sciences at the University of Barcelona. And she's also, very importantly, a member of the management committee of the ERS CRC clinical research collaboration called CATSET. And Rosa is going to talk about a very important topic these days, which are the early life origins versus accelerated decline forms of COPD. Are these the same? How are they different? Well, Rosa, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this introduction. And as said, I've been given the challenging task, despite all these unknowns, to try to define what are the similarities and differences between the early life origins of COPD and accelerated decline. And to do so, this is the outline that I will follow. At first, I would give a brief introduction of the many phases of COPD, and then concentrate on the phenotype, aging biomarkers, and genetics of abnormal growth versus accelerated decline COPD. And finally, move to wrap up all the talk. So very briefly, as all of you know, COPD is a prevalent disease, a leading cause of mortality, still diagnosed with spirometry in the appropriate clinical context. But importantly, the mean age of diagnosis is 65 years of the patients. It's heterogeneous biologically, pathobiologically, and clinically. Some patients have chronic bronchitis, others emphysema, mix of those, different symptoms, exacerbations. Many risk factors, tobacco smoking being a prominent one, also infections, a genetic susceptibility, and these early life origins in which we have exposition since in utero associated to the later in life development of COPD. Very briefly, which are the key unmet needs in this field is to move towards an earlier diagnosis in young individuals to better understand this complexity and heterogeneity, and move towards a better understanding of the mechanism in order to be able to cure the disease. So now we know that in fact there are different vital lung function trajectories associated to the development of COPD later in life, starting from from birth in conception, with this traditional paradigm of normal peak lung function with accelerated lung function decline associated to smoking, and an abnormal inflammation is present in about 50% of the individuals with spirometrically defined COPD in its 6th decade of life. On the other hand, between 4 to 12% of the general population have this abnormal peak lung function, which is in early adulthood, that may lead to COPD later in life without an accelerated decline or with an accelerated decline. So this is why I said it's a challenging task, like to identify accelerated decline from abnormal or early life origins, because it can be both a mixture of early origins plus accelerated decline. However, what we now know is that in general, there are these lung function growth trajectories, some of them the ones that are above the normal range, or even this lung growth failure have been recently associated with inflammatory processes. While on the other hand, traditionally, after the peak lung function, this presence of COPD has been associated with these so-called hallmarks of aging. What are the hallmarks of aging? Are these 12 different processes that occur in the cells that the group of Carlos López-Oquín in 2013, now they have just launched a new revisited version of the hallmarks of aging, described that happen in all the cells as they age. And it's not usually, it can be correlated with chronological age, but it's a marker of the biological aging of the individual. And I will be referring of what evidences we have of accelerated aging and this accelerated lung function decline, or in relation to this abnormal peak lung function. In clinical, several terms have been emerging to move towards an earlier diagnosis. And here I want to specifically introduced this term young COPD, as I will be using it, to refer to those individuals that are younger than 50 years old, but they fulfill the clinical definition or the gold clinical definition of COPD, while I will use the term old COPD for those individuals that have more than 50 years of age and fulfill the clinical definition of COPD. So what we know about old COPD? So many studies using clinical variables have been a variety of clustering methods and identified several phenotypes of patients. We know that some patients with old COPD have persistent inflammation, comorbidities, coexistent with asthma, emphysema, exacerbations, and high eosinophil counts and a genetic background. Many efforts have been trying to identify biomarkers of these individuals with old COPD. If we have a look from 2000 to just last year, the number of papers published in PubMed, you will see the rise of number of studies in biomarkers. It's very difficult to summarize that in one slide, but I would say that most of the studies use patients with COPD or with a mean age of 65, have described sputum neutrophils, change levels of eosinophils, whole blood counts, inflammatory markers like CRP, adipokines, associated with smoking, emphysema, change of FEV1 exacerbations, but also pneumoproteins like CC16 have been in several and reproducibly associated with smoking, emphysema, and this poor lung function. So we know that it's heterogeneous clinically and biologically. There are also papers that have been trying to use this clustering of different, measuring different biomarkers and clustering the biomarkers in groups, and then comparing how these different clusters of biomarkers now relate to the clinical characteristics. So these works are showing us that it's not just one biomarker, it's a signature of different biomarkers that is, for example, associated with the presence of cardiovascular comorbidity. If we now want to translate this knowledge to what is in young COPD, very few cohorts of young COPD are currently available or are still under development. But I want to show you some briefly work that we did in our early COPD cohort in Spain that includes 100 patients that are younger than 50 years old and 200 smoking controls. Of course, they fulfill the definition of COPD. They have a variety of FEV1 levels, so some have more impairment and the airflow limitation than others, and present different degrees of DLCO. But importantly, about 63% of these young patients with COPD recruited from tertiary hospitals presented emphysema in the CT scan, about 60%, while I would say also surprisingly, 20% of these young controls, smokers, presented also emphysema. If we want to summarize all these in one network, what we can see is this young COPD is associated with impairment in the functional domain, but as in all COPD, with whole blood counts, low education levels, smoking, and visits to the GP at an earlier age. Interestingly, the well-established COPD cohorts like Eclipse or COPD Gene had an inclusion criteria that was older than 40. So we can use, they included some patients that fulfill the definition of young COPD. And if we compare these three cohorts, the one in Spain and these other two cohorts that are international, we see the same. Patients with young COPD have, from the clinical setting, have impaired lung function, presence of emphysema, and some blood biomarkers, suggesting that these patients from this same setting have similarities at the phenotypic level. But if we now move to earlier in time, so if we want to see how are these young individuals, 25 to 35 years of age, with normal or abnormal peak lung function in relation to these clinical characteristics and biomarkers. I just want to show you this recent study that we did in collaboration with the Lifelike cohorts. And these 300 individuals were selected and matched by smoking, so we cannot explore the smoking status. But I just wanted to draw your attention that individuals with a low level of FEV1 in this early adulthood have a shorter tendency to shorter duration of pregnancy, but importantly, they have wheezing, they have abnormal lung function, they were matched to have no difference in the diagnosis of asthma. But if you remember some of these biomarkers that just show you a couple of slides before related to COPD at age of 65, like low levels of CC16, SRH, and some inflammatory markers, if we now measure them in these low peak lung function individuals, what is interesting is that these individuals that don't have COPD, they only have for now an abnormal peak lung function. They present abnormalities in the same biomarkers, in the same direction of effect, that when they are included in the regression model, they add to the classification of these patients with the level of lung function. But interestingly, here we measure two aging markers, the telomere length and the mitochondrial DNA, and those were not associated in these young individuals. So, as said, usually after the peak, COPD is associated with an accelerated aging. Some examples of that, one of the hallmarks of aging are the differences in the level of methylation. So in lung of patients with well-established old COPD, what we do see is general hypomethylation, one of these hallmarks of aging. Some studies are now showing using what is called these biological clocks that use some of these CPGs to predict the age of the individual. So some studies have shown that patients with old COPD, both in the airway epithelial cells or in the blood, have an acceleration or an accelerated aging measured using these aging clocks biomarkers. So what do we know about aging, accelerated aging in young versus old COPD? Again, very little, but some preliminary studies also show that in this young population of COPD versus this old population of COPD is the level of airflow limitation associated with shorter telomeres. So it's aging in relation to accelerated aging in relation to the severity of airflow limitation in both age ranges, so independently of the age of the individual. We did not see the same for the level of DLCO, likely because of the small sample size of the young COPD cohort, but more studies on these aging biomarkers in younger individuals are warranted. And about genetics, this is the latest COPD GWAS that was published several years ago and identified some new loci associated for COPD. But interestingly, they found some SNPs associated with lung development, supporting the role of early life events in the risk of old patients with COPD. But what is more interesting is if they use these genetic biomarkers combined and produce a polygenic risk score, which captures the information of all the genetic variants in one single measure. This polygenic risk score of COPD is associated with the age of diagnosis of COPD, meaning that young individuals on two different cohorts, this is on COPD gene and the other is on Framingham, the polygenic risk score is associated with the earlier age of COPD diagnosis, incident COPD. And here you can see that even if you use to model to discriminate patients with COPD, just using the
or to things like hypoxemia. And so when we think about a diagnosis of COPD, we should also be thinking actively, does the patient have cardiovascular disease, heart failure, ischemic heart disease, and arrhythmia? Do they have diabetes or metabolic syndrome? they have osteoporosis, and very important, importantly, I think, do they have anxiety and depression? We're probably quite good at picking up the cardiovascular disease. I think we're much less good at picking up the psychological aspects. So let's think about another patient. This is a patient, again, a 58-year-old man who's now been referred to your clinic, who's had no previous therapy, no previous diagnosis. He gives a history of having had 3 what he calls chest infections in the last 12 months. He's breathless climbing a flight of stairs. He is still smoking and has accumulated 60-pack years altogether. He's somewhat overweight. He's known to have type 2 diabetes and depression, and he's not worked for the last 10 years. Again, you do some investigations, you find that he's got significant airflow obstruction, his FEV1 is 55% predicted, he's got a ratio of 0.6, his CAT score is 22, and his blood eosinophil count, you know from his general medical records, is 320 cells per microliter. Treatment objectives, what are the treatment options, and what would you do? So for me, we need to think about the GOLD treatment objectives. There are the initial objectives of reducing symptoms, improving exercise tolerance, and either be dual bronchodilator therapy or triple therapy. I'll talk about that in just a second. He's got COPD, so in the new GOLD report, we make recommendations about the initial management based on the classification into groups A, B, or E. In this man's case, he would fall into group E because he's had these 3 exacerbations in the previous 12 months, and we could recommend either dual bronchodilator therapy. But if his blood eosinophil count is high, we've made a practical recommendation that you could, as first-line treatment, consider triple therapy in a man And then we move into a cycle of review and adjust. Would review the symptoms, whether they've improved, review the response to our advice. Is he still smoking? Has he been able to take exercise or not? And as time goes, and then we move into a cycle of review and adjust, where we would review the symptoms, whether they've improved, review the response to our advice. Is he still smoking? Has he been able to take exercise or not? And as time goes, count of 220. When you check his inhaler technique, he is able to use his inhaler quite well. So again, the same questions. What are the treatment objectives? What are the options? What would you do in developed heart failure and making sure that he's had his vaccinations. So he fits in the right-hand box here, where his problem is both exacerbations and breathlessness, and you can escalating. He was on dual bronchodilator therapy So in his case, in the middle there, you can see that if his eosinophil count is above 100, then
you.